Let's talk about education. Big, kerfuffle, is that the correct term? Last week about the government's, frankly, pitiful contribution to children's recovery from all that education they lost last year. Well, today, the Shadow Education Secretary, Kate Green, is calling for a vote on the children's recovery plan before the summer holidays to end what they call the government's catalogue of chaos on education. Well, Kate Green joins us right now. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Julie.
Catalogue of chaos. I don't think there are many people, regardless of how they vote, who disagree. What in particular are you concerned about?
Well, obviously, the latest kerfuffle, as you rightly say, about the failure of the government to take the advice of their own expert advisor, Sir Kevin Collins, and invest in a package of measures to help children bounce back from the pandemic. And that's a package that Labour strongly supports, and we've published our own proposals, which are very similar, including extra activities at the end of the school day to help children both with their learning, but also their social and emotional well-being. And we've also called for mental health support to be available for schools and, of course, extra funding for schools to be able to concentrate more teaching time and teaching attention on children who've perhaps lost most learning during the pandemic. But that comes on, after, as you rightly say, a catalogue of failures, whether it's been on failure to provide free school meals during the holidays, whether it's been on the exams chaos that we had last summer and considerable uncertainty about the GCSE, BTEC and A-level results this summer, the failure to get testing properly organised in schools, which meant children in and out of class. And today we're really calling on the Prime Minister to do what he says he thinks he's doing, which is to put children and their education first. And come forward with a proper package of support, proposals that will enable children to bounce back from the pandemic and to do that before the summer so that schools can plan and put in place all the necessary activities and support that children and young people need, so that we don't see them wasting another term before we start to get them, really back on the road to recovery.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think my listeners could agree with you more when it comes to this absurdity of leaving it until next year or even the year after to actually start this programme. It should have been started last year, but and the sort of money that we need, we're putting in a fraction of what has been put in other countries, including America, who's got an incredibly poor history in terms of education. But a lot of people also will be thinking, it's a bit darn rich for the Labour Party to be saying, oh, isn't it terrible? All these children lost out on all this education. When the Labour Party kept calling for schools to be closed. We never needed to close schools. Many countries kept their schools open during even the height of the pandemic and were absolutely fine. It's a bit rich for you to be saying, oh, we've got all this trouble, we need to do something about it. You were supporting the thing that created the problem in the first place.
Well, no, I don't think I was, Julia. I think if you look back at everything I've said since I first came into the post a year ago, if you look at what Keir Starmer has said, we've always been absolutely clear that schools should be the last to close, the first to open, the best place for
but you wanted schools to be closed.
No, Julia, really.
Yes, you did.
We were very, very clear that the best place for children and young people to be was in school. There was, of course, a really difficult time in New Year when we were getting advice from SAGE that unless we closed schools for a time, the R rate would not fall below 1. You were right to draw comparisons with other countries that didn't have to do this. And I would say
didn't have to do it, chose not to do it because the data was clear that children weren't at risk and they weren't vectors in the community.
I absolutely agree with you about children. Thankfully, children are not at serious risk of illness or, sadly, death. But there was evidence that having schools open at that time was contributing to the spread of the infection in the community. Now, you're right to compare what we had done with other countries where that wasn't necessary because they put better mitigations in place. They got a testing system into schools earlier. It was
never necessary. And when schools went back on March the 8th, many people who the supposed experts were saying, well, we're going to see a surge in cases. Cases continue to go down.
They did initially, and then, of course, we had the Easter holidays, which was a very helpful natural circuit break, but they have been rising more recently. Now,
I'm sorry. If the cases don't rise straight after kids go back to school, then it's not related to kids going back to school.
Well,
there was a huge increase in testing. I mean, a massive increase in testing, which you're going to find more cases. If you suddenly test 5 million kids, you're going to find some more cases. The fact that those kids pretty much to a child didn't have a single symptom, totally irrelevant.
Well, I think we've got to take the advice of scientific experts. They've been clear that, first of all, there is a lag. You don't see the minute children go back to school that the number of cases starts to rise. Secondly, I accept that what you say about testing is true to a degree. If you test more people, you will identify more of the people who are infected. But it's not all related to the number of tests carried out. If you look at the sort of proportion of people in the tested population, that rises too. I think that we can see that there has been a rise. It's not clear that that's happening in school. It may just be that children travelling to and from school, mixing with family and friends, is the underlying driver of that rise. But basically, I want kids in school, but I want every mitigation that we can put reasonably in place to keep them there. And that has always been my position.
And one teaching union is now calling once again for children to wear masks again with the upsurge of the Indian variant in some parts of the country. Should children wear masks in the classroom again?
Well, as you know, I'm an MP in Greater Manchester, where we have this quite alarming rise at the moment in the infection rate, the Delta infection. And one thing that I think teachers in my region will want to be able to consider is perhaps children wearing masks again for a time while we get that infection under control. I would be saying that heads are very good at making these decisions. But
no, they're not. Heads have got no medical expertise whatsoever.
But they do need information from the government about the effectiveness of mitigations like mask wearing. And I think they're well placed to balance that with whether that aids or inhibits good communication.
Well, we know it inhibits. We know it inhibits communication. We know it inhibits learning.
Balance, Julia. It is a balance. And I would say that option for heads to be able to say that children should wear masks.
So people without any medical expertise at all to do something which we know harms children for a disease which we know causes very little illness and virtually no deaths at all in healthy children. You think that should be allowed? You want our children masked in schools?
I think heads have to have the discretion to take the measures they feel are workable and safe in their schools, but they do need the benefit of really clear and transparent information from governments. And that's what some of the head teachers unions, for example, have been calling for. Please explain to us, government, what analysis you've done of the impact of mask wearing in school. Yeah, well, in the meantime, I think it will provide reassurance, particularly
reassurance, and that's what it's all about. It's the theatre, isn't it?
Is that a problem?
Yes, it is a problem because we are mixing up the theatre of safety with actual safety. If masks made a difference, there would be a clear. You could see in any country where they introduced a mask mandate or ended a mask mandate, you would be able to see a clear change in the graph in the relation of cases. And there's not a single US state, not a single country in the world where you can see that. That suggests that masks don't really make much difference at all. But we know they have a negative effect.
Forgive me, Julia, neither you nor I is medically qualified.
No, I don't need to be medically qualified to look at a graph.
You said that heads did need to be medically qualified, so now you say you and I don't. The World Health Organization did recommend mask wearing. I don't think I should be saying
they didn't recommend it for the first few months, actually, and with no new evidence whatsoever, they decided to change the advice because it's about the theatre. It's about reminding people there's a pandemic. It's not about actually making a difference. There is simply no proper empirical world evidence that masks, and again, Ofcom can complain as much as they want. There is no convincing evidence whatsoever that shows they make any real difference. At some margins, 1 or 2%, there might be some difference. But the reality is, you have not seen changes in case numbers in any country when they introduce or end a mask mandate.
So my view is that on their own, they're not going to make more than a very marginal, if any, difference. But you have to think about the way in which we approach this pandemic in the round and a package of mitigations, achieving a number of different things, including, yes, reassurance and reminder, as you say, of the seriousness of the situation we're in, as well as the actual practical efficacy. But I do think that it is important when we're coping with a surge, for example, in Greater Manchester, as we are at the moment, that we are able to protect for heads that opportunity to make decisions that work for their children and their parents.
Okay, well, again, I'm going to ask you very, very quickly, but I know we're over time. There's Oxford students, Magdalen College, Oxford, postgrads. Apparently they're too traumatised by seeing a portrait of the Queen on the walls, voted to take it down because it reminds them of Britain's recent colonial past. Do you agree with them?
Oh, you know, Julia, you and I, we know students have been like this forever. I mean,
not in my day.
Sure how much I care what they hang on their walls, but everyone knows that the Queen is incredibly committed, incredibly dedicated and hardworking. And, you know, this is a silly storm in a teacup when we all know that she's been of tremendous service to our country over many decades, and I hope she'll continue for many years to come.
Education Secretary Kate Green, thank you as always. I appreciate that.